Welcome to Velvet Confessions. If this is your first try, then drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. We have viewers from Vancouver to Halifax, and we love knowing you're out there. Now settle in, because this story is going to stay with you. The night before her daughter's wedding, Daphne Whitmore signed the papers that would make her the largest private landowner in the province of Ontario. She didn't tell anyone. She poured herself a glass of Riesling from the bottle she'd been saving for 3 years, sat down at the kitchen table of the house she'd bought with her own money after the divorce, and signed her name 37 times across the bottom of documents that her lawyers had spent 14 months assembling. When she was done, she capped the pen, set it on top of the stack, and went to bed at 10:15, so she'd be rested for the morning. She slept fine. That was the thing people would never quite understand about Daphne, the sleeping. Her ex-husband Kenneth had always been the one who couldn't sleep. He'd pace the hallway at 2 in the morning, worrying about quarterly projections, and what his father thought of him, and whether the neighbors had noticed the scratches on the Mercedes. Daphne would lie in the dark and listen to his footsteps and think through her calculations in the quiet way she had, column by column, risk by risk, and by the time he came back to bed, she usually had her answer. She was good at that. Being still while the world moved around her. It had taken Kenneth 11 years to realize she was thinking. He'd assumed, for most of their marriage, that she was simply waiting for him to finish. The wedding was at a vineyard outside Niagara-on-the-Lake, the kind of place that costs more per hour than most people make in a week. Daphne had offered to help pay. Her daughter Lydia had said that wasn't necessary, that Preston's family was handling it, that Daphne didn't need to worry herself. Daphne had smiled and said, "Of course, whatever you need." She arrived at 11 in the morning in a car she drove herself, wearing a dress she'd chosen because it was elegant without being memorable. She did not want to be memorable today. Today was Lydia's day, and Daphne understood what that meant and intended to honor it completely. The vineyard was beautiful in the way Ontario is beautiful in late September, the light going amber and low, the leaves on the vines turning a red that almost looked deliberate. Tables were set up on the terrace with white linens and candles that wouldn't be lit until evening, and there were already people moving around looking important, the way people do at weddings when they have a role and want you to know it. Kenneth was there, of course he was. She saw him before he saw her. He was standing near the bar that had been set up beside the stone wall, holding a glass of something sparkling, wearing the navy suit he always wore to events where he wanted to seem approachable. He looked the same as he had at the divorce mediation. Healthy, comfortable, the kind of man who moves through the world without friction because the world was built for men who look exactly like him. He was talking to a woman Daphne didn't recognize. She was somewhere in her early 40s, well-dressed, laughing at something Kenneth had just said. Daphne noticed the way he touched the woman's elbow when he made a point. She recognized the gesture. She'd been on the receiving end of it for over a decade. She found her seat at the family table, set down her bag, and went to find Lydia. Lydia was in the bridal suite, which was actually a converted storage room that the vineyard had furnished with a mirror and a love seat and a great many flowers. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful. She'd gotten Kenneth's cheekbones and Daphne's eyes, and the combination was almost unfair. "Mom." She turned from the mirror and immediately looked uncertain, the way she'd been looking at Daphne for most of the past 3 years. "You look stunning," Daphne said, and meant it entirely. Lydia softened. "You think? I know." They stood together for a moment, and Daphne felt the particular weight of that room, the last quiet before everything changes. She remembered her own wedding morning in a church basement in Oakville with bad lighting and her mother telling her to stand up straight. She had been 26 years old and certain of everything. "Preston's mom was asking about you," Lydia said, turning back to the mirror. "She wanted to know what you do." "What did you tell her?" A pause. "I said you were in real estate." Daphne considered this. "That's accurate." She seemed. Lydia adjusted something in her hair. "She was surprised, I think, that you'd gone back to work after everything. That was how Lydia referred to the divorce, after everything. As though it had been a weather event. Something that had simply happened to the family, with no author. I didn't go back, Daphne said, gently. I started. Lydia looked at her in the mirror. Something passed across her face that Daphne couldn't quite name. Then someone knocked on the door and the moment was over. The ceremony was at 2 o'clock on the terrace. Daphne sat in the front row, on the left side, the family side, which still felt strange. Being Lydia's family and Kenneth, sharing a row with his sister and the cousin who'd never his sister and an aunt, and had made no effort to hide it. Kenneth sat 2 seats down. They did not speak. They had agreed, through Lydia, that today was not a day for whatever they needed to eventually say to each other, and so they performed the civilized version of themselves, the version that smiled at the officiant and rose when the music started and watched their daughter walk down the aisle, on the arm of a man who had, Daphne granted, never once been unto Lydia. The vows were simple and, clearly, personal, and the guests laughed in the right places. Daphne watched her daughter's face while Preston spoke, the absolute certainty there, the brightness of it, and felt something move through her that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite joy, but lived somewhere between them. She hoped Lydia would always look like that. She hoped that whatever came, however the years shifted the shape of this marriage, Lydia would remember the feeling of this afternoon. She did not cry. She hadn't cried at her own wedding either. She felt things deeply and privately, and that had always been misread as coldness by people who needed emotion to be visible in order to believe it was real. Kenneth cried, just slightly, a quick press of his fingers to the corner of his eye during the exchange of rings. He'd always known how to perform emotion for an audience. She used to admire it. For years, she'd thought it meant he felt things more than she did. It had taken her a long time to understand the difference between feeling things and showing them on cue. The reception moved inside as the sun went down into the barrel room, which had been strung with lights and smelled like old oak and something floral. There were speeches. There was dancing. There was a past appetizer involving prosciutto that Daphne ate 3 of, because she hadn't had lunch. She was standing near the edge of the room, watching Lydia dance with Preston's father, when Kenneth appeared beside her. She'd been expecting it. There was an inevitability to Kenneth in enclosed spaces. He always found the person in the room he most needed to address. She had been that person for 11 years. You look well, he said. Thank you. How's the... Lydia mentioned you've been busy. Lydia's right. He turned his glass in his hand. This was a thing he did when he was assembling a sentence he wanted to sound casual. I heard you've been picking up some properties. A few, she mentioned Muskoka. He waited for her to elaborate. She didn't. I just thought, he said slowly, since we're both in the same, in related spaces, essentially, there might be value in Kenneth. She said it quietly, the way she said most things. This is your daughter's wedding. He stopped. I'm very glad you're here, she continued. I'm very glad we can both be here for her. That matters to me. But I'm not going to talk about business tonight. A long pause. The music shifted. Lydia laughed at something across the room. Of course, Kenneth said. You're right, I'm sorry. He drifted back toward the bar. Daphne watched her daughter dance. What Kenneth didn't know, what most people in that room didn't know, was the shape of what Daphne had spent the last 4 years building. It had started, almost accidentally, during the separation. She'd had time suddenly, vast amounts of it, the silence that comes when you stop organizing your life around another person's needs. She'd used it to think, the way she'd always been best at, slowly, carefully, from first principles. She'd had some money. Not a great deal. The settlement had been fair in the technical sense, which meant that it had accounted for the assets that existed on paper, and not the years of work that had no paper attached to them. The dinners she'd managed, and the moves she'd coordinated, and the clients she'd entertained, and the weekends she'd spent networking on Kenneth's behalf at golf tournaments she had no interest in. None of that appeared on a balance sheet. None of that had been counted. She had found she was not bitter about this, exactly. She was clear-eyed about it, which is a different thing. She'd taken what she had and bought a small residential property in Hamilton. A duplex, Nothing remarkable. In a neighborhood that most people in her former social circle would have considered declining. She'd renovated it herself, not with her own hands, but with her own planning, her own sourcing, her own contractor relationships that she'd built from scratch by showing up and paying attention and never being the kind of client who cancels at the last minute. She rented both units within 3 weeks. The numbers were modest and she reinvested all of them. Then she bought another property. Then 2 more. Then she started looking at commercial parcels, at industrial zoning, at the land outside cities that people overlooked because they were thinking about what the land was and not what it was about to become. She had always been good at seeing forward. Kenneth had called this worrying. She had never corrected him. She'd brought in a partner 18 months in, a woman named Beverly Okafor, a land use lawyer who had grown up and could read. A grown-up in Scarborough could read a zoning amendment faster than most people could read a text message. Together they'd started looking at a corridor of land north of Barrie that no one else was watching. They'd spent 8 months doing due diligence, quietly, without announcing themselves, which was how Daphne did everything. The signed documents on her kitchen table. The night before had formalized the acquisition of the last parcel in that corridor. Combined with what they already held, Daphne and Beverly now controlled 260 acres of land that sat directly in the path of a planned transit expansion that the provincial government had not yet publicly announced. They knew about the expansion because they'd done the work to know. They'd read every infrastructure consultation document filed in the past 3 years. They'd attended public meetings that no one else bothered to attend. They'd hired an analyst who specialized in municipal planning and paid her well and listened to everything she said. The land was worth, at current assessment, approximately $42 million. Beverly's projections once the transit announcement came, and it would come, they were certain of it. They had 3 independent sources and a stack of documents that told only one story. Put the value north of $300 million. Daphne had not told her daughter any of this. She'd not told anyone outside the small circle of people whose jobs required them to know. She had smiled at Kenneth when he mentioned Muskoka and let him draw his own conclusions, which she knew from experience would be the wrong ones. She was not hiding. She had simply learned over the course of her life that announcing things before they are finished is a way of giving other people an opportunity to interfere. She had finished now, and she had not needed anyone's permission or assistance or belief to do it. It was nearly 10 o'clock when things shifted. She was at the family table with Kenneth's sister, Pauline, who was on her 3rd glass of wine and feeling generous, and Pauline's husband, Jeffrey, who'd been trying all evening to tell Daphne about a real estate opportunity in Prince Edward County that he wanted her advice on. She'd been listening with half her attention and using the rest to watch the room. Preston's father, a man named Harold Crane, was making his rounds of the tables. Harold was a developer. That was how Lydia had described him when they'd first started dating Preston. As if it explained everything, which to some degree it did. He'd built residential subdivisions across the GTA for 30 years. He was the kind of man who knew what things cost and was slightly disappointed when they didn't cost more. He reached the family table and settled into the empty chair beside Daphne, with the ease of someone who sits down wherever he wants. "Daphne Whitmore," he said. "I've been meaning to get to you all night." "Harold." She shook his hand. "Congratulations. Your son's done well." "He has." He looked across at the dance floor where Preston and Lydia were moving in a loose circle with several of their friends. "Though I'll say I wasn't sure about this match for a while." "Oh, nothing against Lydia? She's a wonderful girl." He paused in the particular way people pause when what follows will slightly contradict what just preceded it. "I just wasn't sure about the family situation." Daphne waited. "Kenneth's business has had some difficulties," Harold said, in the careful tone of a man delivering a verdict he's already reached. "I've been keeping an eye on things in the sector. His commercial portfolio has been underperforming for a few years now. The market's been unkind to people who over-leveraged in 21. He turned his glass on the tablecloth. "When Preston told me who his mother-in-law was going to be, I did some looking." "That's thorough of you." I like to understand what I'm connected to. He said it without apology, because men like Harold never apologized for the things they did with information. I couldn't find much on you, actually, which I'll admit surprised me. I keep a low profile, so I gathered. He studied her with a frank appraisal of someone who has spent decades assessing value. I heard something recently, though, through Beverly Okafor's office. Some land north of Barry. Daphne looked at him steadily. I tried to buy into that corridor 18 months ago, Harold said. Whoever was moving through it was ahead of me by about 6 weeks at every turn. He paused. That was you. That was me. A long silence. Harold looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on a man's face in a very long time. It wasn't attraction. It wasn't condescension. It was the particular respect that men like Harold reserve, almost exclusively for other people who have beaten them at their own game. The transit announcement is coming in March, he said. February, she said. He blinked. Just slightly. I have the corridor, she said. Beverly has already fielded 3 inquiries from developers. We haven't committed to any of them. We're still deciding what we want to do with it. Harold was quiet for a moment. Then, what would it take to get you to meet with me week? A reason, she said pleasantly. A good one. He smiled. It was the smile of someone who has just understood exactly who they're talking to, possibly for the first time. I'll prepare one. Across the room, Kenneth was telling a story to the woman in the green dress. He had his hand on his lapel the way he did when the story was reaching its payoff. The woman was laughing. Daphne watched him for a moment. This man she had loved and been loyal to and built a life alongside for over a decade. She thought about the morning he'd asked her to stop working at the property management firm where she'd been bookkeeping because the hours were inconvenient and clients sometimes called during dinner. And it was, he'd said, not really something they needed. She'd been 31. She had agreed because she loved him, and she thought his judgment was better than hers, and it had taken her 9 more years to understand that she confused confidence with competence and paid a significant price for the confusion. She did not hate him. Hate required a kind of sustained energy that Daphne had never found useful. She understood him, which was different and more honest, and in the long run harder to escape. Lydia appeared at her shoulder. Mom, are you okay? You've been over here for a while. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just watching. Lydia followed her gaze to Kenneth. He's had too much to drink. Probably. He said something to you earlier, didn't he? I saw him come over. He asked about work. Daphne looked at her daughter. It was fine. He doesn't. Lydia started again. He doesn't really understand what you've been doing. I've tried to explain it, but she made a small, frustrated motion with her hand. He thinks you've been puttering. It drives me crazy. Daphne touched her daughter's hand. Don't let it drive you crazy tonight. Tonight is yours. Go back to your husband. Lydia looked at her for a long moment with her grandmother's eyes in her face, the eyes that Daphne saw in the mirror sometimes when she wasn't expecting it. I want you to know, Lydia said quietly, that I think what you've done is extraordinary. What you've built. I don't say it enough. Daphne felt something in her chest. Not the ache she might have expected, but something warmer and more solid. You say it by being who you are, she said. That's enough. Lydia hugged her and went back to Preston and the music and the lights. The announcement came on the 14th of February. Daphne was in Beverly's office when it broke. The two of them, sitting across from each other, with coffee going cold on the desk between them, and Beverly's laptop open to the provincial government's live stream. The Minister of Transportation stood at a podium in a room full of journalists and announced a $47 billion transit expansion that would connect 6 municipalities over the next 12 years, including a new regional rail corridor running directly through the land north of Barry. Beverly said something. Daphne didn't catch it because the number on the screen was still settling into her mind. Sorry, she said. What? I said, Beverly repeated, with a steadiness that suggested she was also still calibrating, that my phone is already ringing. Don't answer it yet. Beverly looked at her. Give it a week, Daphne said. Let them get anxious. Beverly considered this. Then she closed the laptop, turned her phone face down on the desk and picked up her coffee. 1 week, she said. By the end of that week, they had received 9 formal expressions of interest, including one from Harold Crane's company, which arrived by courier on a Thursday morning in a folder, with his firm's letterhead and a number on the 3rd page that made Beverly set down her water glass very carefully. Daphne read the letter twice. Then she set it on the desk beside the others and looked out the window at the February street, gray and cold and bright with reflected snow. The way Toronto is in winter, when the light bounces off everything and the whole city looks briefly like a place that's been rinsed clean. She thought about the duplex in Hamilton, the contractor she'd called on a Tuesday afternoon, not knowing yet whether he'd laugh her out of the conversation. The public meetings she'd attended alone in community centers that smelled like floor cleaner, sitting in plastic chairs with 10 other people, while a municipal planner pointed at maps that everyone else was too busy to look at. She thought about Beverly, who'd sat across a coffee shop table from her 4 years ago, and said, simply, "I've been waiting for someone to see this," as though Daphne's arrival had been something Beverly had expected all along. She thought about standing in Kenneth's kitchen the morning. He told her the firm had made another offer, and she'd set down the French press and said, "That's wonderful," and meant it, fully, without reservation, because she had been that kind of wife, the kind who meant things, and she had learned the hard way that meaning things is not the same as being valued for it. She did not think about this with anger. That part had passed. What remained was something more like clarity, a clean-edged understanding of who she was, and what she was capable of, and how little any of it had ever depended on being believed in by the right person. She called Beverly's assistant and asked him to set up meetings for the following Monday. Kenneth called her on a Saturday in March. She was at the Hamilton property, the original duplex, where she still went sometimes when she needed to think, standing in the backyard on a cold morning with a coffee watching the tenants' kids kick a soccer ball against the fence. "I saw the announcement," he said. "The transit line." "Yes, was that?" He paused. "Was that what you've been working on this whole time? Part of it?" A long silence on the line. She could hear traffic behind him. He was probably in the car, which was where he made calls he didn't want to make from the office. "Daphne." His voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him in years, a kind of leveled-out seriousness that existed beneath the performance. "What's the land worth?" "That's not really something I'm going to discuss with you, Kenneth." "I'm not asking because..." He stopped. "I'm not asking for a reason. I'm just..." Another pause. She waited through it. "I didn't know you were capable of this." She looked at the kids in the backyard. The soccer ball hit the fence with a clean, hollow sound. "I know you didn't," she said. She wasn't cruel when she said it. She didn't need to be cruel. She said it the way you state something true and long established. A fact so settled, it doesn't require weight behind it, because the weight is already there, built into the words, lived into them over years. "I hope Lydia's doing well," he said, after a moment, because they were still in some fundamental way parents together, and that was not nothing. "She's wonderful," Daphne said. "She's happy." "Good." His voice was quiet. They said goodbye. She stayed in the backyard a while longer, drinking her coffee, watching the kids play. The announcement was 12 years of infrastructure and several $100 million in projected land value. And it had her name on it, and she had not once, not at the vineyard with the white linens and the amber light, not across from Harold Crane with his measuring gaze, not in Beverly's office with the phone already ringing. She had not once felt the need to explain herself to anyone who hadn't thought to ask. That she had found was the real thing, not the number, not the land, not the lever of it, the scale of it, the sequence of right decisions made alone in quiet rooms. The real thing was the discovery, at 52, that she had always been exactly enough, and that this had been true. On the days no one noticed just as much as it was true now. She finished her coffee. She drove back to the city. She had meetings on Monday.